My name is Laura and I'm 54 years old. I've lived a fairly ordinary life, filled with routines and quiet evenings. It's been years since my children left the nest, and I've been divorced for nearly a decade now. Most days I wake up alone, make myself a small breakfast, and head out for errands before the grocery store gets too crowded. It's a mundane existence, one I've come to accept, if not necessarily love. That's when everything changed. It was a Tuesday morning, a typical one like any other. I was pushing my cart down the produce aisle, mindlessly picking out apples and oranges, when I nearly collided with a young man reaching for the same bunch of bananas. I glanced up, ready to apologize, but the words stuck in my throat. He was younger, much younger, maybe in his early 30s, with an athletic build and a disarming smile that lit up his entire face. "Sorry about that," he said, his voice warm and kind. "Looks like we both need our potassium fix." I laughed, something I hadn't done genuinely in a long time. "It's okay," I replied, feeling a blush creep up my neck. I guess great minds think alike. We exchanged a few more lighthearted comments, and I found myself lingering longer than usual, savoring the unexpected connection. His name was Chris, and he told me he was new to the area. He'd recently left the military and was trying to adjust to civilian life, finding solace in small routines like grocery shopping. There was something different about him, something magnetic. He wasn't just being polite or making small talk, he was genuinely engaging with me, looking me in the eye, making me feel seen. I hadn't realized how starved I was for that kind of attention, for someone to look at me and see more than just an aging woman pushing a cart through a grocery store. As we parted ways, he flashed me another smile, one that made my heart skip a beat. "I hope I bump into you again," he said. I nodded, feeling strangely exhilarated. "Me too." For the rest of the day, I couldn't stop thinking about him. It was silly, I told myself. He was just a kind stranger. But something had shifted inside me, a spark I hadn't felt in years. And I found myself looking forward to my next grocery run, hoping for another chance encounter with the man who had, in a matter of moments, made me feel alive again that I didn't expect to see him again so soon. But there he was, the very next week, standing in the same aisle. Chris caught my eye first, and the grin that spread across his face was infectious. I felt a flutter in my chest, a sensation I had long forgotten. "Back for round 2, he joked, holding up a carton of strawberries. "I guess I am," I replied, smiling back. "Seems we have similar shopping schedules. Or maybe it's fate," he said lightly, but there was something deeper in his gaze. It made me feel like the most captivating person in the room, even in my simple jeans and sweater. For a moment, I felt like a younger version of myself, a woman with charm and wit who could keep up with a man like him. We strolled through the aisles together, talking about everything and nothing. He told me about his time in the military, the places he had seen, and how he was struggling to find a sense of normalcy now that he was back. I found myself opening up too, sharing stories from my past, my divorce, and how quiet life had become since the kids moved out. It felt strange to be so candid with a near stranger, but with Chris it was easy. He listened, really listened, in a way I wasn't used to anymore. He laughed when I joked about being a grocery store regular, and for a moment, we were just two people enjoying each other's company. I hadn't realized how much I had missed this kind of simple, light-hearted conversation. "Laura," he said, as we stood by the checkout line, "it's really nice talking with you. You make this whole grocery run a lot more enjoyable." I felt a warmth spread through me. "I could say the same, Chris." We exchanged phone numbers before we left, almost as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, or even if I'd hear from him again. But the very next day he texted me, asking if I wanted to grab coffee sometime. I stared at the screen for a long moment, feeling a mix of excitement and fear. This was something new, something I hadn't experienced in years. But it felt good. It felt like the start of something I couldn't quite name yet. "Sure," I replied, my hands trembling as I typed. "I'd love that." And just like that, a friendship began. A friendship that brought light into my dull days, that made me look forward to waking up in the morning. We started meeting up once a week, sometimes for coffee, sometimes just to walk around the park. There was a natural ease between us, an unspoken understanding that bridged the gap between our ages. He had a way of making me laugh, of teasing me gently without making me feel small. One afternoon, while sitting on a park bench, he told me a ridiculous story about a prank he and his fellow soldiers had pulled on a sergeant. I laughed so hard that I had to wipe tears from my eyes, and he watched me with a smile that made my heart swell. "You're beautiful when you laugh," he said softly. I felt my breath catch. It was a simple compliment, but it meant the world coming from him. I hadn't felt beautiful in years. Not in the way a man looks at a woman and truly sees her. But in that moment, with the sun shining down on us and the sound of children playing in the distance, I felt it. I felt seen, and I felt wanted. I knew then that this was no longer just a friendship. Something deeper was blooming between us, something I wasn't sure I was ready for but couldn't resist either. As weeks turned into months, our connection grew stronger. It became a routine. Meeting up for coffee, strolling through the park, and even browsing through thrift stores together. Chris had a way of making every moment feel like an adventure, even if it was just walking through a quiet, sunlit street. One Sunday afternoon, we sat at a small cafe, sharing a slice of cheesecake. He leaned back in his chair, smiling at me as if I was the only person in the world. I watched him, really watched him, for the first time without the veil of friendship clouding my vision. His easy laughter, the slight crinkle at the corners of his eyes, the way he listened with genuine interest, it all hit me at once. I was falling for him. The realization washed over me like a wave, both thrilling and terrifying. I'm a woman in my 50s, I thought. I'm supposed to be beyond these kinds of butterflies. But there they were, fluttering in my chest, making my hands tremble slightly as I sipped my coffee. I hadn't felt this way in decades, not since I was a young woman, head over heels for my first love. It was exhilarating and confusing, like a long-forgotten song playing in the background of my life. Chris reached across the table and brushed a crumb off my cheek with a gentle touch. "You've got a little something there," he said, his fingers lingering for just a second longer than necessary. The simple gesture felt like a spark, igniting something deep inside me. "Thanks," I managed to say, my voice softer than usual. I couldn't meet his eyes, afraid he might see the truth there, the feelings I was struggling to keep hidden. On the walk back to our cars, we stopped by the edge of the park. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over everything. I felt an overwhelming urge to tell him how I felt, but the words wouldn't come. What if I scared him off? What if he only saw me as a friend? The fear was paralyzing, a reminder of the years that stretched between us and the expectations society placed on women like me. He turned to me suddenly, his expression serious. "Laura, I need to tell you something." My heart skipped a beat. Was he about to say it? Did he feel the same way? My mind raced, but I forced myself to stay calm, nodding for him to continue. "I really enjoy spending time with you," he said, his voice soft, almost hesitant. "I look forward to seeing you. It's different, you know? I don't know how to explain it, but I haven't felt this kind of connection in a long time." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. It wasn't a confession of love, but it was something. It was a glimmer of hope. "I feel it too, Chris," I whispered, surprised at my own honesty. He smiled, taking a step closer. For a moment, it felt like the rest of the world faded away. It was just the two of us, standing on the edge of something new, something that could change everything. "I'm glad," he said, reaching out to squeeze my hand. His touch was warm, grounding me in the moment. "I was worried you didn't feel the same." I squeezed back, the smile on my face widening despite the swirl of emotions inside me. "Oh, Chris," I said, laughing through the tears, "I feel it more than you know." We stood there for a while, holding hands as the sun dipped below the horizon. It wasn't much, just a touch, just a shared moment, but it was everything. It was the beginning of something I hadn't dared to dream of, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was stepping into the unknown with open arms, ready to embrace whatever came next. After that day, everything changed. Our dynamic shifted in a way that was both exhilarating and terrifying. I found myself looking forward to his messages, catching myself smiling at my phone like a lovesick teenager. I knew what this was. It wasn't just a fleeting crush. It was something deeper. I hadn't felt this way in decades. Giddy, hopeful, and yet terrified of what it all meant. One evening, as I sat in my kitchen nursing a glass of wine, I caught my reflection in the window. The woman staring back at me had lines around her eyes, silver strands mingling with the dark. I wasn't the young, carefree girl I once was. I was a woman in her 50s, set in her ways, with a past that stretched long behind me. And Chris, he was in his early 30s, a man with his whole future ahead of him. What could he possibly see in me? I put the glass down and closed my eyes, the fear sinking in deeper than I expected. People would talk if they knew. My friends would look at me differently. They'd say I was making a fool of myself, chasing after something I had no right to want at my age. And what about Chris? Would he wake up one day and realize he'd made a mistake? That he could be with a woman his own age, someone who could give him a family, someone without the baggage I carried? I was lost in these spiraling thoughts when my phone buzzed on the counter. It was a message from him. Chris. Hey, are you free tonight? I was thinking we could go for a drive. I found this great spot overlooking the city. I'd love to show you. My heart did a little flip, and I felt a rush of warmth. The doubts quieted, just for a moment. I realized then how much he had become a part of my life, how much I craved his presence, his laughter, the way he looked at me like I was the only person in the room. I hesitated for just a second before typing back. Me, I'd love that. I'll be ready in 30 minutes. He picked me up as the sun was setting, and we drove in comfortable silence, the city lights twinkling in the distance. He reached over and took my hand without a word, his thumb tracing small circles on my skin. It was such a simple gesture, but it felt like a promise, a reassurance that whatever this was, whatever we were building together, was real. We parked at a lookout point, high above the city. The view was breathtaking, the kind of place you'd see in movies. Chris leaned back against the hood of the car, pulling me close. I rested my head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart against my cheek. Laura, he murmured, his voice low and serious. I know this isn't easy for you. I can see it in your eyes, the way you hold back sometimes. I felt my throat tighten, but I nodded. It's not that I don't want this, Chris. It's that I'm scared. I'm scared of what people will say, of the looks we'll get, of waking up one day and realizing this was all just... Just what? He asked, turning to face me. He cupped my cheek in his hand, his eyes searching mine. A mistake. I bit my lip, tears stinging my eyes. Yes. What if you wake up one day and realize I'm too old for you? That you want something different? He shook his head, a small, sad smile on his lips. You think I don't know the difference in our ages? I do. But that's not what I see when I look at you. I see a woman who's strong and kind, and who makes me laugh like no one else. I see someone who gets me, who doesn't care about the stupid things people judge me for. I'm here because I want to be Laura. And I know you feel it too. I broke then, the tears spilling over. He pulled me into his arms, and I clung to him like he was my lifeline, my anchor in the storm of emotions I'd been drowning in. It felt like such a release, like I was finally letting go of all the fear and insecurity that had held me back for so long. I do feel it, I whispered against his chest. I just don't know how to stop being afraid. Then don't, he said, pressing a kiss to the top of my head. Be afraid, but do it anyway. That's what love is, isn't it? It's messy and scary, and sometimes it doesn't make sense. But it's worth it. You're worth it. We stayed there, wrapped in each other's arms, as the city glowed beneath us. It felt like we were on top of the world, like the rest of it had fallen away, leaving just the two of us and the love we were too scared to name. But deep down I knew I loved him, and it wasn't something I could ignore anymore. And that terrified me as much as it thrilled me. The ride home was quiet, but not in an uncomfortable way. It was as if both of us were wrapped in the shared understanding of what we'd just confessed without needing to say the words. Chris's hand never left mine, his thumb still tracing those same small circles that felt like he was sketching out a path into my guarded heart. As we pulled up in front of my house, I hesitated. The usual nervous flutter was there, but this time it felt different. More like anticipation. I knew what I wanted to do, what I needed to do, but fear still gnawed at the edges of my courage. He shifted in his seat, giving me a sidelong glance, sensing my internal struggle. What's on your mind, Laura? He asked softly. I turned to face him, taking in his features, the stubble lining his jaw, the slight crinkle of concern in his eyes. He was so young, yet there was an intensity in him, a steadiness that made me feel safe in a way I hadn't felt in years. "Do you want to come inside?" I blurted out before I lost my nerve. The words hung in the air, heavier than I expected. I couldn't take them back now, and a part of me didn't want to. Chris blinked, surprised, but a slow smile spread across his lips. "Are you sure?" he asked, searching my face for any sign of hesitation. I took a deep breath and nodded. "Yes, I'm sure. I don't want to say goodbye yet." The moment the words left my mouth, I felt a rush of relief, as if a weight I'd been carrying for months had finally been lifted. I wasn't playing it safe anymore, wasn't hiding behind excuses or the comfort of my routine. I was stepping out into the unknown, and I wanted to take that step with him. He leaned over and pressed a gentle kiss to my forehead. "Then I'd love to come in." We walked up to my front door, and my hands trembled slightly as I unlocked it. He noticed, of course, but instead of saying anything, he just gave my hand a reassuring squeeze. It was such a simple gesture, but it made me feel like I wasn't alone in this, like we were facing whatever came next together. Inside, the house was dimly lit, the remnants of the day's sunlight casting a soft glow through the curtains. I led him into the living room, feeling oddly exposed in this space that had always been mine alone. "Can I get you something to drink?" I asked, more to fill the silence than anything else. "Whatever you're having," he said, his voice warm and easy. I disappeared into the kitchen for a moment, my heart racing. I poured 2 glasses of wine, then took a steadying breath before walking back into the living room. He was standing by the window, looking out into the fading light, but when he turned to face me, the intensity in his gaze made me stop in my tracks. "Laura," he said softly, taking the glass from my hand. "You don't have to be nervous." "I know," I said, forcing a smile. "But I am anyway." He took a step closer, setting his glass down on the coffee table before gently taking mine from me as well. He placed it next to his, then cupped my face in his hands, tilting my chin up, so I had no choice but to look at him. "It's just us," he said. "No expectations, no pressure. Just you and me." And that was all it took for the last of my resolve to crumble. I leaned into him, pressing my lips to his in a kiss that felt like it had been building for months, years even. He kissed me back with the same hunger, the same need, and I realized then how much I'd missed this, missed being wanted, desired, seen. We broke apart, breathless, and I felt a small, shaky laugh bubble up in my chest. "You know," I said, trying to lighten the moment, "I never do this. Invite men over." "I believe you," he murmured, his forehead resting against mine. "And I'm glad you made an exception." "Me too," I whispered. We stood there for a long moment, wrapped up in each other, the world outside feeling like a distant memory. I knew what was going to happen next, and I wasn't scared anymore. I felt ready. "Let's go upstairs," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. Chris looked at me, his eyes darkening with something I couldn't quite place but recognized all the same. He nodded, and without another word, he took my hand and followed me up the stairs, into the unknown, into whatever this was between us that felt like it was only just beginning. The door to my bedroom creaked open, and the soft glow from the hallway spilled inside, casting a gentle light across the familiar space. For years, this room had been a place of solitude, a sanctuary where I retreated alone. Tonight it felt different. It felt alive. I turned to look at Chris, standing there in the doorway, a mixture of tenderness and desire etched across his face. He didn't rush in. He just watched me, as if giving me the time I needed to make the first move. And for that I loved him even more. He was patient, letting me take control of a moment that felt monumental. I stepped closer, closing the distance between us. His hands found my waist, and the warmth of his touch sent a shiver through me. "Are you okay?" he whispered, his voice low and full of concern. "Yes," I breathed out, surprised by how much I meant it. I reached up, cupping his face, and brought his lips to mine. The kiss was slow and sweet at first, filled with the kind of longing that had been simmering between us for months. Then it deepened, turning urgent, as if we were trying to make up for lost time. We tumbled onto the bed together, the world outside fading away. For a moment I pulled back, looking into his eyes, needing to know this was real, that this wasn't just some fleeting fantasy. "Chris," I started, but he hushed me, brushing a strand of hair away from my face. "It's just you and me, Laura," he said. "Whatever happens, happens. I'm here because I want to be. I've never wanted anything more." Hearing those words, my heart swelled. I realized then that I hadn't felt this kind of connection in decades, if ever. I wanted him in a way that was raw and real, beyond any rational explanation. I pulled him closer, guiding his hands as they traced a path along my skin, exploring, memorizing. It felt like we were speaking a language without words, our bodies telling a story that had been waiting to be told. We moved together slowly at first, savoring every touch, every kiss. Then the pace shifted, becoming more intense, a wave of passion that neither of us wanted to hold back anymore. We shared a moment so intimate, so powerful. It felt like the world could have ended outside and we wouldn't have noticed. When it was over, we lay there tangled in each other's arms, the only sound our heavy breathing and the rhythmic beat of our hearts slowly settling back into sync. He pressed a kiss to my shoulder, his arm wrapped protectively around me. I turned to look at him, and for a moment, we just lay there, our eyes locked, communicating in the silence that this wasn't just physical. It was something deeper, something that couldn't be explained away by a fleeting attraction. I could see the vulnerability in his eyes, mirroring my own. I wanted to ask him what this meant, where we went from here, but the words felt unnecessary. For now, it was enough to just be, to exist in this moment together without any promises or plans. "I've never felt like this before," I whispered, almost to myself. He kissed the top of my head. "Neither have I," he admitted. "But I don't want it to end." I clung to him a little tighter, burying my face in the crook of his neck. "Then let's not let it end," I said. And for the first time in years, I felt like maybe it didn't have to. As dawn crept through the curtains, casting a soft glow across the room, I found myself awake, lying on my side, just watching Chris sleep. His face was so peaceful, almost boyish. It was a stark contrast to the man who had held me last night with such intensity, such care. I reached out, gently tracing a line along his jaw, and for a moment, I let myself imagine a life where this was normal, waking up next to him every morning, feeling this complete. But reality settled in just as quickly as the sunlight touched his cheek. He was younger, by at least 2 decades. And the world had a way of reminding you when you didn't fit its expectations. I'd lived long enough to know how people talked. The raised eyebrows, the whispered judgments. It wasn't just the age gap. It was the audacity of me, a woman in her 50s, daring to feel this way again. I got up slowly, careful not to wake him. I needed space to think, to let my mind catch up with everything my heart had just experienced. I wrapped myself in a robe and padded into the kitchen, the cool tiles beneath my feet grounding me as I put on a pot of coffee. I watched the steam rise, my mind swirling with questions I wasn't sure I had answers for. Was this love? It felt like it. It felt like everything I'd forgotten love could be. Spontaneous, consuming, a little bit reckless. But I couldn't help but wonder if it was just the thrill of feeling wanted again after so many years of solitude. Maybe I was fooling myself, caught up in the fantasy of it all. Yet last night hadn't felt like fantasy. It felt real, as real as anything I'd ever known. I thought about the way he looked at me, not with pity or condescension, but with genuine desire. I thought about the way his touch felt, not just on my skin but somewhere deeper, as though he could see right through the walls I'd built up over the years. I sipped my coffee, staring out the window. The garden outside was overgrown, a testament to how I'd let things slide since the divorce. It was easier to ignore the mess, easier to focus on my routines. Work, errands, dinner alone. The grocery store had become the highlight of my week, a small escape where I could feel part of the world without really participating. And then Chris walked into my life like a gust of wind, blowing open doors I'd thought were permanently shut. He found me here, in this middle stage of life, where so many women feel invisible. He saw me, truly saw me, in a way I hadn't felt in decades. But was that enough? Was I enough for him? Or would he wake up one day and realize he wanted someone his own age, someone who could give him everything I no longer could? I turned as I heard the soft sound of footsteps behind me. Chris was there, leaning against the doorway, his hair tousled, a sleepy smile on his lips. "Morning," he said, his voice husky. Morning, I replied, trying to smile back, but I knew he could see the storm of thoughts behind my eyes. He walked over, placing his hands on my shoulders. You're thinking too much, he teased gently, pressing a kiss to my forehead. Maybe I am, I admitted. But I can't help it. I need to be sure. Sure of what? He tilted my chin up, forcing me to look into his eyes. Sure that this is real, I whispered. That it's not just a fling, that it's not just me trying to recapture something I lost a long time ago. His expression softened, and he cupped my face in his hands. Laura, I'm here because I want to be. I don't care what anyone else thinks. I care about you. I've never felt this way before, and I don't want to waste a single moment of it. Tears pricked at my eyes, but they were the good kind. The kind that come when you realize you've found something precious, something you thought you'd never feel again. I nodded, leaning into his touch. I just don't want to hurt you, I managed to say. He smiled, wiping away a tear with his thumb. The only way you could hurt me is by pushing me away. I wrapped my arms around him, holding him close. For now, I decided I'd stop questioning it. I'd let myself feel this joy, this connection, without worrying about what might come next. Because maybe love wasn't about finding the perfect match or fitting into society's mold. Maybe it was about finding someone who made you feel alive, no matter how unexpected it was. And I felt more alive now than I had in years. As we stood there in my kitchen, holding each other close, I realized something important. This wasn't about the age gap, or what people might say, or the complications that could arise. It was about love, pure and simple. I'd been married once before, and I knew what it was like to feel stuck, to settle for comfort over passion. This was different. Chris made me feel like I was waking up after a long, dreamless sleep, like I was finally seeing colors again. Later that day, we took a walk together. The sun was shining, the autumn leaves crunching under our feet. We didn't say much, but we didn't need to. His hand in mine was enough, a silent promise that we were in this together. I caught a glimpse of our reflection in a store window, me, with silver strands in my hair, and him, looking young and full of energy. It could have been a moment to feel insecure, but I didn't. Instead, I saw a woman who had dared to take a chance on happiness, no matter how improbable it seemed. We talked about the future that evening. I was honest with him, admitting my fears about our age difference, about what it might mean down the road. But he just laughed and shook his head. We'll figure it out, he said. One day at a time. That's all anyone can do. And he was right. I'd spent so much time trying to plan, to control, to predict. But life wasn't about playing it safe. It was about moments like this, moments that were real and raw and beautiful. Moments that made all the waiting and the loneliness worthwhile. We decided then and there to stop hiding. We'd go out, hold hands in public, and let people think what they wanted. Because this was our story, and we were writing it together. There was no shame in loving someone, no matter the years between us. Love wasn't about age. It was about connection, about seeing someone's soul and wanting to be close to it. 3 months later, we stood together in a small, intimate ceremony, exchanging vows in front of a handful of close friends. It was simple, just like us. When we kissed, I felt the rush of love and joy I hadn't felt since I was a young woman. The world fell away, and there was just us, two souls who had found each other against all odds. Looking back, I can see it now. Love comes when you least expect it, and it doesn't care about timing or age or the rules we've created for ourselves. It comes like a storm, and if you're lucky, it sweeps you off your feet and carries you somewhere new. It took me 53 years to learn this, but better late than never. So, to anyone out there who feels like their time has passed, who thinks they've missed their chance at love, don't believe it. Love can find you at any age, in the most ordinary of places. And when it does, don't be afraid to grab hold and let it take you. Because life is too short to live in fear, and too precious not to follow your heart. Chris and I, we're proof of that.